try to clear up what's going on. So we're going to pray, and then we'll take it. Father, we count it a privilege to be able to open up your word to get a better picture of who you are and your plan for us. So I pray through our time together for it to be rich and for your Spirit to guide the whole process for a better understanding of your interaction with humans and what you are really like. I ask that in Jesus' name. If you want to open up, start with an illustration about puzzles. At our house, sometimes we get these puzzles, and people like to give us like these impossible puzzles, like all the pieces are red or something of that nature. And I'm like, so you pull a piece out, I have no idea. I'm like, I hate impossible puzzles. I don't know. I don't know why people even sell them, but you get this piece, and it looks like every other piece in the box, and it drives me crazy. So what I have to do, I'm like, all right, let me look at this, and okay, I have no idea where it goes until I get the top part of the puzzle box. You look at that, and I'm like, okay, this might go here. And this course is kind of designed in that way where it's kind of like the top of the puzzle box. It's provided to give you a general overview of what the Bible's like. Sometimes when you hear a sermon or a lesson, you get like a piece of the puzzle. And you're like, well, where exactly does that fit into what God's trying to do, what God's trying to say? So this is designed to give you that overview of what the Bible says, and where all of the pieces kind of are put together. So we're doing 5 different sections here. These 5 sections spell out the Bible, so hopefully it helps you in remembering what they are. So the first one's the beginning. That's a good place to start, at the beginning. And that's going to talk basically about how God started things off. What was God's plan? How did it work out? What's the foundation? The second one is the Israelite children. So God, what he does is he picks a man named Abram, and he starts the Jewish people. And he does something pretty spectacular, just focusing in on the Israelite nation. The third one is bodily Christ. Out of the Jewish nation comes the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And so that whole section is focused on Jesus. And after Jesus leaves, this new thing called the church starts. And so that's the fourth section on the church, and the E stands for the ending. If you don't have a pen, pens are on the side. This notebook, there's some fill in the blanks, places to highlight, you can get your lipstick out, whatever you need to do, and you can fill in. So let's talk about the Bible before we even jump in here. The Bible's a pretty amazing, pretty unique book. It's amazing how unified it is. Sometimes when you look at that book and you're like, wow, it's just a book, so what's the big deal that it has unity, like one message? Well, when you taking into account that it has 66 books, 40 different writers over the span of 1,500 years, unity is pretty incredible. It has one story, and it's God's solution for man's sin. So from beginning to end, it's God's story about how he deals with mankind. And so God is the hero of the Bible, not man. So everything has to do with God and his glory. So again, appreciate you for taking this course, and we're going to jump into the beginning. So my page numbers aren't going to correlate with yours probably, but I'm on page number 3, the beginning. So the timeline there starts with creation to about 2200 BC. And this is the smallest section that we're going to be dealing with as far as content in the actual Bible. We're only doing 11 chapters. But just because the content's small doesn't mean the material is less important. Actually, some of these things are really foundation that we'll talk about. And we start at an interesting spot. We're going to start with angels. Why are angels first on the list? because when the Bible talks about angels, it talks like they're already there. So I don't want to talk to you for an hour. I'll just have some of you read. I'll have some verses up on the screen. Some verses will be in the booklet, and some verses we will look at in the Bibles together. So could I have a volunteer to read Job 38, please? Don't be shy. Can you read that up on the screen, please, someone? Thank you. Go ahead.
Angels, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundations and who laid its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy.
Thank you. So God and Job have a conversation here. And by the way, Job is probably the earliest book of the Bible. And so they're having a dialogue, and Job basically spends most of the time back and forth with his friends, and he's like, God, what is the deal? And God shows up and says, hey, I know what I'm doing. And verse 7 says, basically said, where were you? You know, if you're such a big shot, you know everything. Where were you when the angels shouted for joy when I created? And so there's this concept when God's creating, you have the cheerleaders in the background or the angels supporting what is going on. And so from that, what needs to be said about the angels is that God creates them good. And there are a lot of them. But not all of them stay good. One leads a rebellion against God, took some of the other angels with him. And so we call the fallen angels, the ones that were part of the rebellion, demons. And the leader is Satan. And so sometimes in your booklet you'll see there are verses that can be looked up in addition to that. The Isaiah and Ezekiel seem to refer to Satan there. So basically what I try to sum up, what is Satan's purpose in this world? And the purpose is to oppose God. So anything that God's doing, Satan wants to come and oppose that. And I'm not going to put the fill in the blanks up there. I'm just going to say it so they're not too terribly difficult. So that first fill in the blank is oppose God. So God's, we'll see as it unveiled through here, God's affection is towards humanity. And so who's the object of Satan's opposition? Humanity. When we talk about the Jews, the Jews throughout history, I mean, you don't even have to look at the Bible, just what an oppressed people they have been because Satan has opposed them. I put Ephesians in here because I think it's important. Ephesians 6, it's in your booklet. Final word, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. For we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers, authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Here's what I want to say about kind of the spirit world before we move on. The Bible paints a very real picture of the spirit world. There's this unseen world around us, and there's a spiritual battle that is going on. And in that spiritual battle, we kind of have some allies, and we have some enemies. And that's something, and I know as a tendency as a American, I tend to forget. So, from the beginning, God creates these beings, and then we go into the next section called creation. So creation. Someone just read that Genesis 1:1 there, that fragment. It's in your booklet.
In the beginning, God created.
And that's how it starts. In the beginning, God created. Or even you can chop it up this way. In the beginning, God. So the very first thing that we kind of have, that we're exposed to in the Bible is God. And we are exposed that God is the author of creation. He's the one that's at the beginning creating all things. And if you want to open up to Genesis, we're going to go through some of that. We're going to start reading in the next section in chapter 2. But basically, in chapter 1 gives the creation account where God speaks things that are not into being, and it's pretty spectacular how it's presented. It says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and they were without form and void. And then the first day, God says, let there be light, and there was light. And so, out of nothing, God creates. And so we're going to see that there's a rhythm. God speaks, it happens, and it was good. So the first day, we see that there is light. And then that second day, there's this waters that he separates, and it's the sky is created on day 2. And so he looks at that and says, oh, that's good too. Day 3 begins with dry ground and puts plants and trees on day 3. He looks at what he's made that day, and it is good. So day 1, light. Day 2, the sky. Day 3, ground, plants and trees. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. So a great light to rule the day, light to rule the night, some stars. Looks at it, it's good. Day 5, you have fish and birds that are being created. God looks at those. It's good. And then day 6 is different. Day 6, a little bit more creation goes on. God creates animals. And then he creates beings to be like him, humans. And this day is a little bit different because we had this rhythm of God speaks, it happens, it's good. God speaks, it happens, it's good. This day, God speaks, it happens, and it's very good. And there's a kind of progression that happens in this creation account. And it just seems like, in the beginning God created heavens and the earth, and it was without form and void. And so we kind of have this kind of Play-Doh, and all right, we have something to work with here. And it just seems to be getting better and better. Each day just going upward. So it finally climaxes on day 6. What I find interesting, this is free, but what I find interesting on the last day is he saves the last, most complex, wonderful being for the very end. Do you know what that is? That being is? It's not just a human. What kind of human? What kind of human? There's male and female. The woman. The woman is the very last, kind of the pinnacle of God's creation. I find that kind of an interesting thought. God, you saved the best for last. I don't know, I'll just put that out there. So, what's that? Is Naomi here? She's not. No, but honestly, it's something that, isn't that an interesting thought? Things keep getting better and better, and the woman's not an afterthought. It is the kind of like the best of the best. So, before we move into the next section, I want to say a few things. The fact that God creates is more important than how he creates. So, let me say it this way. When you look at that creation account, there are some different opinions about does one day actually equal one literal day? Does a day actually equal maybe an age or like 1,000 years? And so there's a lot of different thoughts about how that actually took place. It is more important the fact that God was the author of that than how it took place. Does that make sense? Does that add up? Yeah? Okay. So, one being is created in God's image, with God's thumbprint on them, and that's humans. And they are created to have a relationship with him. That's how it's originally designed from the very beginning. They weren't designed to go off by themselves and have nothing to do with God. But unfortunately, that gets broken. And we're going to spend a little bit more time in this next section called sin. Sin means to miss the mark. God has a standard, and when people don't live up to that, the Bible calls that sin. Another way to say it is disobeying God. Could I have someone read Genesis chapter 2? It's on the screen. Please.
The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die."
Thank you. In my house, we have a few rules. Some things that do this, don't do that, and we try to make that clear. Here, God at the beginning has one. I would have loved to grow up in this household. We only have one rule here, and it's not like Dad's always right. But here's just one rule, and God says you can eat from any tree in the garden, anything at all. But verse 17, you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then he says the consequence. When you eat from it, you will die. So God was very clear, the first person to Adam, says, Adam, this is my desire for you. I want you to feel free to enjoy yourself, except for this one thing. Stay away from that. So we're gonna open up our Bibles. Hopefully you have yours with. If you don't, there should be one underneath the seats to Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to see how this plays out. So Genesis chapter 3, we're going to read verses 1 to 7. And again, I'm going to, instead of me just doing it the whole time, I think it's good to just have a little bit back and forth here and include you guys. So if someone would volunteer to read Genesis 3, I would appreciate it nice and loud. Go ahead, thank you.
Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from the tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." How far do you want me to?
Through verse 7, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. When the woman saw what the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together, and they made coverings for themselves.
Thank you. So, serpent comes to the woman. First question there, verse 1. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? So he's kind of testing the waters with her, seeing, okay, what does she know? What does she not know? And she responds, verse 2, "We may eat from the trees of the garden, but God said you must not eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it or you will die." So she adds a little bit to it. She said, there was no touchy thing. It's just, don't eat of that. And then verse 4 is where it kind of begins to turn. It says, "You will not surely die," the serpent said, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil." So the first time the serpent comes, he's like, "Well, did God really say you can't eat any? Like, you're going to starve to death out here? What's the deal with God?" And she's like, no, we can eat, but there's this one tree we need to stay away from because it'll be bad. And then verse 4 is where the serpent says, "Well, no, you're not going to die." Like, I know God said that, but he's just holding out on you. Do you see how that is? This is going to go well for you, but God doesn't want that for you. So She said, you're not going to die. God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So the serpent comes and just says, listen, you need to understand something about God. That God is not good. Essentially is kind of what's going on here. God's not good. God doesn't want what's best for you. And if you're going to get what's best for you, you have to take it for yourself. And so the temptation is there. Okay, God gave a clear directive. He said, this is what I want. And then there's a direct contradiction here. Well, who do I believe? So essentially, just kind of have to rely on herself to make that kind of decision. So when the woman saw the fruit was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. And then here's one of those verses that you just, what? She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So the guy was there. He wasn't even, he was just passive. He was just letting all this happen. Didn't speak up at all. Didn't say, whoa, let's slow down here. Because God was the one that came to me and said this original thing. It didn't happen. He was there, kept his mouth closed, and she ate some, and he's like, I guess I'll have some too. And that's when sin enters the world. Verse 7, the eyes were both open. They realized they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together to make coverings for themselves. And what's going to happen here is God's going to say, what's going on? So let me keep reading. So for me, if you want to write, I don't know if you're taking notes, if there's some things. That one thing I would write down there is that's the first sin or original sin. The serpent deceives the woman, but Adam fully decides to sin. She was tricked, but the command had gone to Adam, and so the full weight of this is going to fall on the man, because God gave the command to Adam. So at that time, we talk about the concept of free will. They had total free will to choose. Should we choose this? Should we choose that? And they chose, in the midst of that free will, to rebel against God. So it's going to play out that God's going to be, verse 8, was walking in the garden, and they hid from him. And kind of that instinctive shame that comes with, shame and guilt that comes with sin. And they hid from God. It breaks the relationship with God. And he's just going to say, what happened? And immediately you begin to see that relationships fractured. So, verse 11, God speaking, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? So here's the man that God looked in the eye and gave the command. He's going to stand up and take it, right? The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. So the man says, well, it's her fault. The woman's to blame. You put her here. God, it's your fault. You put this woman here, too. So God says to the woman, what's this you've done? Well, the woman says, well, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. So God's going to talk to the serpent, and the serpent doesn't have anybody to turn to, I guess. And we'll read verse 15 here in a second. What happens in the midst of this passage really shapes how you read the entire Bible. Are people, when you ask someone on the street, are people basically good? Are they basically bad? Are they something else? A lot of times you'll see people are basically good people. I mean, that's at their core. And yet the Bible is not going to present people that way. They're going to present people with this nature, the very nature, the core of them is sin from what has happened here. How did that one event affect us? Well, we turn to Romans chapter 5. It's in your booklet. And Paul goes, it talks at a little bit length about how Adam and Jesus kind of play off of each other. But I just want to look at one verse there. Someone will read that.
Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned.
Thank you. So it says that Adam basically was the gateway to allow sin to enter into the world. So the sin is placed squarely, again, on Adam's shoulders. He brought death into this world. He brought sin into this world. And then every person gets passed on this nature, this sin nature. Everyone is born flawed with sin because of Adam. And so, this slide, the next slide, it just shows very basically that sin separates us from a holy God, and that's going to be the problem. Again, if you look back on page number 2, in bold, it says the Bible's going to deal with God's solution for man's sin. Here we are already. That's what it's about. Man has sinned. They are separated from God. And you see that already the reaction is to hide from God. There was this, and we can talk, we can spend time together that Adam and God had before that, but now it is broken. And it's kind of like, okay, how are we going to get back to having peace with God? What is God's solution for that? So, every person by nature and by practice is a sinner. That means we're sinners because of who we are and of what we do. So it's a both and. It's a both and situation. Not only is sin nature and death brought into the world, but there's some consequences because of that. And so, just like God talked to Adam, hey, what happened, Adam? And he points to the woman, and what happened, Eve? And goes down the line. He's going to give consequences out to each one in chapter 3. Because there's always consequences to sin, whether it's here or in our lives. But here's what's interesting. In the midst, from the very beginning, in the midst of all of that, there's a prophecy of a rescue. And if you have a Bible, I would encourage you to open up. It's in your booklet, but I would highlight Genesis 3:15. Because it's one of those things that if you just read and you're like, I don't even know what that means, but I'm just kind of skipping that. So one of the, I would, like in a by the way, don't be afraid to write in your Bible, because it's there to be used and not just look good. So if you have a highlighter or something, Genesis 3:15 is something that is huge. Because Genesis 3:14, we just went through that. So God said to the serpent, because you've done this, cursed you are above all livestock and all the animals. You will crawl on your belly, eat dust all the days of your life. And then verse 15 comes into play. Someone will read that, please? Yes, please.
You know what? And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offsprings and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
So you read that and you're like, okay. Prophecy is that later part. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. So you have this two opposing forces here. The Satan, the evil part, versus someone from the woman's seed that's going to come and strike a big victory there. And that's one of those prophecies we're going to return to when we talk about Jesus. Just to give you a little preview. You think of what happened on the cross. What did it look like while he was dying? Who was getting the victory? Who was winning? And so there is this kind of a bruising of the heel, so to speak, as Jesus is dying. It seems like the good guy is finishing last, but Jesus takes the darkest day and turns it around to victory. And so he's going to crush the enemy through what he does on the cross. So he talks about, Satan and evil. There's going to be a day when you're going to get crushed. Yeah, you will seem to get yours, where you'll put a bruise, a little bit of hurting on this seed of the woman. In the end, you will be crushed. And so part of what I'm pointing out here is that this is from the very beginning. God says this right away. That says one's going to come. It's going to rescue you. There is hope. This is not an end judgment, even though I'm handing out consequences here. It's going to be okay. So, God in His grace kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden because He says, wow, it'd be pretty bad there's another tree here where they could eat that fruit and live forever. So let's not have them eat that fruit and live like this forever in this flawed, sinful state. And so it's a gracious thing. God kicks them out of the garden as one of the consequences. But you can read on your own, but he's going to say to the woman, verse 16, here are some consequences because you were disobedient to Adam, verse 17. Here's some consequences, and creation in itself, as beautiful as creation can be, and as majestic as it can be, it is cursed because of that sin. So what God does is He takes animal skins and covers Adam and Eve. And again, from the very beginning, there's this picture of death of something covers the sin of someone else. So animals had to die in order for them to be covered from their sin. So again, from the very beginning. Any questions about Genesis 3 and sin? Because that's hugely important as it deals with us. And if you don't understand Genesis 3 and what that means, then the rest of the Bible really doesn't come into focus. All right. So, next one is the flood. Surprisingly, after the garden, things don't go so well. Mankind begins to populate the earth, but evil spreads rapidly. So God decides to put an end to the evil. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 6 for this. Someone wants to read verses 5 through 8, please. Kevin, volunteer.
The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and the birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Thank you. So verse 5, God looked at mankind and saw that mankind's thoughts in his heart, evil all the time. It's just all consuming. And God, one of the saddest verses in the Bible, verse 6, God was grieved that he made man. He looked at man and said, man, I wish I wouldn't have made humans. Sorry that I did that. Seems like a big mistake. And so God decides to flood the entire earth and start over with a man named Noah. part of the reason I have entire, this is not a local flood. This is not something that just happened in that part of the world. It is the entire world that God chooses to flood. Oh, and by the way, this is free. If you're a moviegoer, my encouragement is to check out what the Bible actually says and see if it lines up with the movie, and not just say, well, I didn't know that about the account, because Noah's in theaters now, and I've heard it's not very accurate. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to try to be the guy who hasn't seen it, talk about it. But I'm just saying, read the Bible and see, does it measure up? And you can kind of go from there. So he's going to start over with a man named Noah, and Noah is in the Hall of Faith, Hebrews chapter 11, and just incredible. God says, hey, I'm going to destroy the earth by a flood. I need you to build a boat. And Noah's like, all right, I'm in. Which is just pretty incredible to me that Noah would do that. So Noah builds an ark, and just massive, ginormous boat that can take animals on it and Noah's family to kind of start over. Rains 40 days, 40 nights, and so all the land-living, air-breathing creatures were wiped out. No whales on the ark because it's water and it rained, so they're okay. Fish, all right. They're okay in the flood. But all the land-living, air-breathing creatures get wiped out. And what happens at the end is that God gives a sign. And he says, hey, I'm going to give you a rainbow. Promise that this is not going to happen again. Last section in the beginning is the nations. And this is a quick one. So when Noah gets out, God tells him, you need to repopulate the earth. So after the flood, what do? They gather together basically in one region. They decide they want to make a name for themselves. And so they decide to build a tower in Babel and reach it to the heavens. So there's a picture of the Middle East. You see the Mediterranean, Iraq, Tigris and Euphrates rivers are there. And between those two is possible location for the Tower of Babel. So that's the main thought where civilization started, right in there. And so they gather together. They say, hey, let's build something to the heavens, and people will be able to see what we do. And so Genesis 11, 1 through 9, records the scattering of where God scatters people, gives them different languages. So they begin to spread out and begin different nations and cultures. So they gather, similar languages gather together, and they begin to spread out. So this section basically talks about here, God's the author of creation. He's the one who has started everything from the very beginning. And he creates it good. Okay? He doesn't bring sin into the world, but he does bring the option of sin, because he creates these creatures that have a choice. If you have a choice to love, you also have a choice to hate. So God places these beings that are created in his image into the garden, gives one thing. Says, hey, just don't eat from that tree. If you do, you're going to die. And Genesis chapter 3 is that turning point. Those original two have a choice. What do you do? Because the serpent comes and says, if you do this, you're going to be just like God. He's holding out on you. He's just lying to you. So they decide to rebel against God and what God said, and they bring sin into the world. And as we see in Romans 5, that sin affects us here and now. Everybody's born with the sin nature. No one's getting by on their own. and we need some help. So the prophecy from the very beginning in Genesis chapter 3 is there will be some help. I'm going to send someone who's going to rescue you. And so God comes through. When we talk through these, I'm going to give an application point just to kind of make sure that we're not just talking knowledge, but we're talking about this. And this is kind of huge here. We're not just talking theoretical, we're talking personal. We all inherited a sin nature when Adam and Eve sinned. Every person gets that. For me, it's easy to see as a parent. I didn't have to teach my kids how to say no. They bit other kids. I wasn't modeling that at home. I wasn't going around biting my wife, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, well that's a good way to do things." My 4-year-old made up swear words, like on his own, just made them up. And one of the most tense days we ever had at our house was when, I'm not going to tell you which one, he was sitting on the steps, defiant face, and looked at my wife and said, "Cowie baby, mommy." I knew what that meant because he had used that. He had let that was his curse phrase, "Cowie baby." I shudder even now saying that, but we were shocked. I can't believe my kid said something like that, but it was unique to our thing. Where did they learn to say no, to bite other kids, to swear like that? It wasn't from us. We weren't going around saying that stuff, but they were just born that way. As a parent, you kind of begin to see that, and I know that to be true for myself as well. When we talk about this concept, we were all born sinners. It's inherent in us. That's what we are. And that means we can't help ourselves. We need a Savior. So this first section highlights the sin part. The sin separates us from God. And the rest is going to be like God picking up the pieces from the original sin. God has the solution to sin. It's Jesus. And my encouragement is to really think, have you settled that with God? Have you dealt with your greatest need, which is sin? So let's turn to the next section, Israelite nation. God's going to do something pretty interesting here. There's a timeline, and I want to go through it briefly, and it's something that you can refer back to. This section that we're dealing with now in the Israelite nation is the biggest section that I'm going to deal with. So it's going to deal from the first one there is Genesis chapter 12, which is, again, the first book of the Bible, through Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament. And you can see that it's about 1,600 years. So a lot of time, over half the Bible, the biggest portion of the Bible that we're dealing with. And as we start that, there's only so much space that I had. This is obviously not to scale. But you look at that, we're going to talk about Joseph. Joseph, some of us might know the Technicolor Dreamcoat guy, and the Exodus is when the Israelites leave Egypt. They have a King David, and then their kingdom's going to be divided. It's in the north and south, and so the north is going to be conquered, the south of Judah is going to be conquered, and they get to return, and then Malachi kind of ends it. So that's a general overview of that. And location-wise, again, we're dealing with the Middle East here. Israel, in this stretch of area right here, is going to be the promised land where God talks with these patriarchs, these founding fathers. He's going to promise them the land. But also, when we talk about that, you see Assyria up there, Babylonia, two nations that are going to play into this picture of Israel, modern day Iraq and Iran, and then there, and also Egypt. So they're going to play a part. So when we talk about Israel, we start with the patriarchs, a guy named Abram. God decides to do something different. So Genesis chapter 12 is where we're going to turn. And this is going to be the start of the Israelite nation as God comes to this man, picks Abram to start the Israelite nation. Someone read that for me, please. Genesis 12, 1 through 4.
The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran.
All right. What do you notice there about the promises that God is making to Abram? So he makes a lot of I promises there. What do you notice? You can write these down as they're said. What are the promises that God's making?
Great nation?
I'm going to make you a great nation. Yeah. What else? I'm going to bless you. You're going to, that Abraham would be a blessing. Yeah. What else is in there?
And make his name great.
We'll make his name great. Yep.
No cursing, no curses.
Yep. Whoever curses, whoever curses you, I will curse. Whoever blesses you, I will bless. And then there's one more. The last one there.
People will be blessed through.
Yeah. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So that's one you want to make sure you have written down, and then I would circle that or asterisk or highlight that one. That's the big one that we're going to talk about more so. So you notice as God comes to Abram that there's a lot of I statements there. God said, hey, here's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you into a great nation. And this is on me. And all peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So what's remarkable about Abram is nothing. There's nothing remarkable. God just picks him. There wasn't anything special about Abram. It was just that it gave God good pleasure to pick Abram and say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you into a great nation, and I'm going to bless you. And everybody's going to be blessed because of what I'm going to do for you. And at this point, he doesn't know what that means. There's no like, oh, I know how this is going to play out. And a lot of what's written in kind of this part of the Bible is it's a little bit foggy. Not exactly sure how this is all going to play out. We get to look back and say, oh, I see what that's about. But his part was to do what? To, verse 1, leave your country, your people, your father's household, go to the land that I will show you. Verse 4, what happens? So Abram left as the Lord told him. A lot of stuff I just find remarkable. God says leave. Okay, I'm going to do that. God says build a boat. Sure. Okay, I'm going to do that. Just amazing people of faith. And there's another situation in Genesis chapter 15 that I want to show you. So if you just flip maybe a page to the right. Over and over again, Abram's going to have faith. I'm going to show you a passage that maybe you're not familiar with. Abram's wondering about, he's getting up there in age, and he's wondering, well, okay, you said you're going to make me a great nation. I don't have any kids yet. Like, am I going to give, like, is it going to happen through my servants? Or are you actually going to give me a kid? Or what's going to happen? So, verse 4 through 6. Why don't we read, I'll start in verse 1, just to give you some context. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Do you see where he's at there? Do you understand? He's like, hey, I'm getting up there, and I just don't have any kids, and I'm trying to trust you. Like you said I was going to be a great nation, but I don't even have any kids. Verse 4. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Verse 6, huge verse. Again, another verse that you might want to circle or highlight. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Let me read that again. I want to keep saying Abraham. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So the context here being, okay, God, I don't know what to do. I don't have any kids. What's going to happen? And God says, well, I'm going to give you kids, and your offspring is going to be like the stars in the heavens. You could even count them. That's just how it's going to be. So Abraham, at that point, had a choice. You believe God or not? So, just kind of like before, Abram believed. But notice what follows in that verse. Abram believed the Lord, and he, meaning God, credited it to him, Abram, as righteousness. So there was a credit from God. Like God, if Abram had an account, so to speak, when we believe God, when we take God at his word, God credits to our account righteousness. It's not how awesome we are, because again, it goes back to sin. Sin separates us from God. And so, from the beginning here, just amazing. Abram gets right standing with God through faith, not through works. So let's finish the patriarchs and then we'll be done for today. I struggle with Abram because God changed his name to Abraham. That's part of the reason, I think. And Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, but really the one that we focus in on is Joseph. And so these four are considered like the founding fathers of the Israelite nation. Any questions before we close this section off? Okay, we have 5 sections and 4 sessions, so we're not going to do, we can't do exact. We have to get a little bit more done than one each time. Questions about sin in the garden, Abraham, believe. All right.